Who is this guy?
I like to call him a guy from Scarborough. And I say that because I love the idea of someone who comes from the immigrant dense suburbs of this city, uh, creating this massive international platform for himself.
Why does that matter? I mean, I don't want to get into more of the rocket that he's on in terms of international fame, but why does that matter that he comes from, as you say, the immigrant dense suburbs of the city?
Well, I think that we don't tend to see that story, particularly in our pop culture, in Canadian pop culture. We don't tend to see the triumphant immigrant narrative, but also second generation or third generation immigrants or children of immigrants, people who come from families where maybe, I say maybe, careers in the arts aren't encouraged, making it to the level of success that Tesfaye has.
Is there a connection with his Ethiopian roots and the music that he is creating? The city's got a huge Ethiopian community. There's an extraordinary tradition of Ethiopian music. Does that have anything to do with what he's making right now?
Yeah, I mean, when I interviewed him, we talked a little bit about it. He said he recalled being in his mother's house, and his aunts and uncles would come over, and they would drink coffee and eat popcorn and have the music playing in the back. And so I think there's definitely an emotional texture that translates to his music. A bit of sorrowful, mournful, kind of this forlorn aura to the songs that he's writing. But also he has explicitly referenced Ethiopian singers, and he's sampled Amharic, which is a dialect that's spoken in East Africa. He has sampled Amharic in his music as well, and he sings that on stage too.
The story of the child of immigrants kind of becoming a superstar is fascinating. And as you say, that bit about what happens in the suburbs is really neat as well. The New York Times profiles him and talks about the wasteland of Scarborough. And Scarborough rises up and says, Are you kidding me? That's actually really integral to who he is.
Yeah.
How did he go from that to where he is now, where you can go anywhere in the world and you just hear his music?
Well, I mean, we would have to say that the help of Drake is part of his narrative. He released this mixtape called House of Balloons in early 2011, in March, I believe it was, and Drake promoted that, but also a bunch of songs that he recorded at the time went on to become part of the sound that was on Drake's September 2011 album, Take Care, which was a landmark album for Drake. So there was already kind of a lot of eyes on The Weeknd, and he was able to play big sold-out shows in New York and LA, London, major metropolises. He had a fan base, but he is now experiencing this kind of mainstream radio success that I think people didn't expect from him.
We were in the United States and driving around last year, and you'd be listening to commercial radio, and you'd push a button, and there would be his music, and you'd push a button, and there would be his music, and then you'd push a button, and there would be his music. Does he seem comfortable with the fame and the success that he has?
Yeah, I think so. I think that in my interactions with him, he's normal in the sense that he's getting used to it, which I think one would expect from someone who's going through fame,
He's facing a lot of criticism in part because of the way that he talks about women. People have called him out on this from a distance and said this is misogyny being wrapped in a beautiful rhythm. When you raised that with him, what did he say?
Well, I mean, I had a time slot, and I knew I had to ask him the question. I felt a responsibility
because he hasn't been asked that question.
Exactly. Really. Well, I can't say he hasn't been asked. I'm not sure what the question line was for the other reporters who have spoken to him. But I did ask him that, and he talked a bit about artistic license, and subsequently he said in a Rolling Stone interview that he thinks he needs to take responsibility for it. But I think it's important to remember that as fans of his music, we're all kind of complicit in some of these themes that he talks about that might be deemed unsavory, and he was rewarded for that by the music industry. Those themes were prevalent on House of Balloons, and he was courted by labels and is being given money to make those albums.
Do you feel uncomfortable in that as a fan of his music? That
of course,
that we're complicit in this.
Of course. But I feel that way about a lot of other music that I listen to and that others listen to. I think it's something that people need to be challenged on. I think the discomfort is a good thing.
just briefly, why do you think he's avoided, aside from you, the Canadian media? You're the only Canadian journalist who's got an interview with him.
Yeah. That's a really hard question to answer. I think that part of it has to do with a bit of this aura of mysteriousness that he was trying to cultivate at the beginning. He's also come out and said that part of the reason was because he didn't graduate high school and he feels self-conscious, which I love. I think that's quite endearing. And not that he dropped out of high school, of course, but that he feels self-conscious about it.
Yeah.
But also I think part of the reason, and I get at this a little bit in the piece, is that maybe he hasn't seen himself represented in Canadian media. He hasn't seen his story, he hasn't seen stories of people who make music like him reflected in Canadian media, and so he feels he doesn't need it.
You did a great job in capturing what he means to this city. Well done.
Thank you.